Welcome to all of you. It's so nice to see this crowd. Thank you for coming to the Center for Jewish History, and on behalf of the Leo Baeck Institute and the American Society for Jewish Music, we're very excited about this program. My name is William Weitzer. I'm the Executive Director of the Leo Baeck Institute. For those of you who don't know us, we were founded in 1955, so we're now celebrating our 60th year. Our mission is to preserve and promote the history and culture of German-speaking Jewry. And I'm sure you'll agree that tonight's program fits perfectly with that mission. One of the major stories of the Jewish accomplishments from the Enlightenment through the Emancipation was the role played by elite cosmopolitan Jewish women shaping the German cultural world. Through music and lecture tonight, you'll hear about Sara Levy as a prime example of an influential salon hostess. So not to delay the program any longer, I want to turn it over to Michael Levitt, who's from the American Society for Jewish Music. Michael?
The American Society for Jewish Music has its brief history in your program, and I won't replicate what's there, but I do urge you to read it. Tonight's program is sponsored by the Jewish Music Forum, which is our academic arm. And I'd like to thank our academic chairman, Mark Kligman from UCLA, who is with us tonight, and his two co-academic chairs, James Leffler of the University of Virginia and Judah Cohen of Indiana University, and of course our executive director, Lily Wohl from HUC, JIR, Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion. I just want to point out one thing that isn't in the program that's very important for Jewish music. And the Jewish Music Forum has been developing this over the last several years. Often Jewish music is a sad stepsister in academic societies. So we have formed SIGs, Special Interest Groups, SIG, in some of the major academic societies, which allow people with an interest in Jewish music at major conferences and meetings to get together and discuss various topics of interest. These societies include the American Musicological Society, the Society for Ethnomusicology, and the Society for American Music. The SIGs are increasingly more important areas, particularly for younger scholars, because they allow them a voice in the pantheon of academia and Jewish music. I hope you enjoy this program tonight. We are so delighted to be partnering with the Leo Baeck Institute. This is our first partnership, but there are more planned. And this program, as Billy said, is exemplary of what we can do together. Thank you. Let me just mention let me refer you to the bio in the program of Nancy Sinkoff of Rutgers University, who with Rebecca Cypess and Christoph Wolff put this together, a symposium at Rutgers University, of which part of the program tonight is extracted from.
Good evening. I'm delighted to welcome you to Sara Levy's World, Music, Gender, and Judaism in Enlightenment, Berlin. Tonight's event is the second iteration of a multidisciplinary international symposium, which included the music you will hear shortly, as well as academic papers, a choral performance, and a staged reading of a scene from an Enlightenment play that took place at Rutgers University in September 2014. I'm therefore particularly pleased to acknowledge the presence of Dean James Swenson of the School of Arts and Sciences, who's here tonight, as well to thank George Stauffer, Dean George Stauffer of the Mason Gross School of the Arts, who unfortunately isn't here, whose support made the inaugural event, as well as tonight's program, possible. Additional thanks go to William Weitzer, the Executive Director of the Leo Baeck Institute, to Michael Levitt, the President of the American Society for Jewish Music, and their staffs, particularly David Brown, as well as the staff at the Center for Jewish History, which is the home to these organizations, as well as to other partner groups. Tonight's program is dedicated to the musical legacy of Sara Levy, the fifth daughter of a prominent Jewish family, the Itziks, who made their home in Berlin, court city of the Prussian Empire, in the second half of the 18th century. Levy was born in 1761, just as the city was becoming a center of the Prussian Enlightenment. Benefiting from imperial patronage under Frederick the Great and bourgeois economic development, the arts and sciences grew among the city's cultural and intellectual elite, which included Huguenots, German Protestants, Catholics, as well as Jews. This dynamic cosmopolitan environment proved fateful for Jewish history. Historians have long paid attention to the distinctive experience of late 18th century Berlin Jewry, who represented the first Ashkenazic Jews to become modern Europeans. In contrast to the rest of Prussian Jewry, Berlin's wealthiest Jews enjoyed imperial privileges after the 7 Years' War that allowed them to participate broadly in the stimulating environment of the capital. Empowered by his wealth and connections to the court as the principal supplier of the Prussian mint, Daniel Itzik, Sara's father, was able to create a lifestyle commensurate with elite Gentiles of his period. Striving to integrate into non-Jewish society, Itzik adopted the mores, values, and social practices of the surrounding culture, building an extraordinary home, collecting art, and becoming a patron of music. Here's a slide with his wife. Here's one of my favorite slides of their personal china. Daniel Itzik was also a dominant presence in the formal Jewish community, and with other members of the German Jewish economic elite supported the Haskalah, or Jewish Enlightenment, an ideological movement dedicated to the modernization of Ashkenazic Jewish culture and society. Itzik provided patronage to East European Jews who had traveled to Berlin in order to pursue cultural and intellectual activities beyond the confines of traditional rabbinic learning. Many of these autodidacts found employ as tutors in the homes of Berlin's wealthiest Jews. With the economic backing of their wealthy patrons, the enlightened Jews, known as Maskilim, founded the major institutions of the Jewish Enlightenment in Berlin between 1778 and 1783. They created the first modern Jewish school, the Jüdische Freischule, reading circles, such as the Chevrato Shel Lashon Evel, the Society of Hebrew Seekers, a Haskalah press, Hevrat Chinuch Ne'arim, the Society for the Education of the Youth, which published the first modern textbook for Jewish children, Lesebuch für jüdische Kinder, in 1779, didactic journals for the dissemination of the ideals of the Enlightenment among Jews, including Hamei Yosef, the Gatherer, and later Shulamit. Philosopher Moses Mendelssohn's famous translation and commentary on the Hebrew Bible, Sefer Netifot HaShalom, Pathways of Peace, was also published by the press. True to the dualistic nature of the Haskalah, which advocated both Jewish integration into European society and the regeneration of Ashkenazic Jewish culture, the Maskilim were devoted to the revival of Hebrew. They advocated reforming Jewish education to include secular subjects such as geometry, history, and rhetoric, with the modern study of traditional Jewish texts. And they sought to create broad literacy in Hebrew beyond the confines of the rabbinate. This description of the activities of the Jewish elite, both the financial cohort to which Daniel Itzik belonged and the intellectual group comprised of the brilliant Mendelssohn, the educational reformer and biblical exegete Naftali Herz-Weisel, and the physician Markus Herz, among others, illustrates that the Haskalah of the late 18th century and much of the 19th remained a predominantly male project of Jewish modernization. In fact, if women figured in the Maskilic imagination, it was often as a symbol of what was considered the falsche Aufklärung, or false enlightenment, a pathway of non-ideological modernization that bordered on sexual license and religious radicalism. Many Maskilim viewed the modernizing women of Sara Levy's class as frivolous social climbers, dangerous freethinkers, and hedonists. Such a depiction can be found in the marvelous Haskalah play, Lachsinn und Fremelei, Silliness and Sanctimony, penned by the Maskil, Aaron Halavov's son, in 1796. The satiric play championed the Jewish Enlightenment's middle road of acculturation while lampooning the pretensions of sanctimonious religiosity on the part of the character of the Polish rabbi, Reb Yosefche, and the blithe disregard of a religious commitment on the part of the character of the elite Jewish maiden, Yedchen. In Act 2, Scene 4 of the play, Reb Yosefche interrupts Yedchen when she is playing the fortepiano to declare his marital intentions previously arranged with her father, his bourgeois patron, only to be soundly rebuffed by the spoiled girl, who asserts her will, that distinctive Enlightenment trait. The scene ends with his striking the piano and her crying out, "Klavier ist ganz kaputt. My beautiful piano is completely destroyed." Destroyed, too, are the protagonist's subsequent futures. Both characters find themselves in a brothel at the play's end. He exposed as a frequent patron, she, now penniless, compelled to work at the world's oldest profession. But to interpret the experience of the Jewish women of Berlin through the lens of a Maskilic parody is to read polemic as social reality. The scholarly attention on late 18th century Berlin Jewry, by focusing primarily on the written text of the intelligentsia and on the social behavior of the financial elite, has rendered the historical experience of Jewish women in this period almost invisible. Yet the women, the wives, daughters, friends, readers, and as tonight's concert will show, listeners, performers, and patronesses in their own right, among the German Jewish elite, were active agents of their own Jewish modernization. Their cultural productivity did not generally appear in published Haskalah journals or manifestos. They were not maskilot, enlightened Jewish women with a Hebraist commitment. When they wrote, and they did, often in the characteristic genre of their sex, the private epistle, they wrote in German, not Hebrew. They avidly read literature in German and French, and they played music. 9 women, Rachel Levin, Henrietta de Lemos, Marion Meyer and her sister Sarah, Dorothea Mendelssohn, Amalia Lippmann, Philippine Solz, Rebecca Solomon, and our own Sara Levy, created salons as an active engagement with modern German culture and society. The salons were home to intimate social gatherings that fostered bonds of friendship between Jews and non-Jews, musicians, playwrights, and philosophers. In these exclusive voluntary meetings of cultural sociability, like-minded friends and acquaintances met to discuss and experience new arts and ideas. Through their involvement with modern culture, the daughters of the Berlin financial elite moved easily from Jewish circles out into the world and into friendships, and sometimes into love affairs between Christians and Jews. Many, but not all, converted. The choice of so many of the elite Jewish women of Sara Levy's period to convert to Christianity has been a subject of fascination, both by contemporaries and later scholars, particularly by historians of women. Most scholars position the salonière as a litmus test of Jewish continuity in the face of rapid modernization. They either praise them as proto-feminists who successfully challenged the patriarchal conventions of traditional Jewish life, or condemn them for exiting the Jewish community. For Heinrich Glatz and Shimon Dubnov, the great 19th century historians of the Jews who wrote history as part of their commitment to modern Jewish existence, the salonière were traitors, severing their ties to their religion and people. 20th century Jewish nationalist historiography concurred with this historical reading. Newer views of conversion, both in the medieval and early modern worlds, suggest that converts did not necessarily abandon their former faith community or kinship relationships. Modern conversion usually occurred after acculturated behaviors, such as participating in general German artistic and literary culture, engaging in interfaith social gatherings, and loosening ties to traditional Jewish religious prescriptions had long been in place. Conversion, it is now suggested, was part of the spectrum of choices within Jewish modernization. It may have been proven particularly appealing to women who lacked the tools of traditional Jewish learning with which to negotiate a new form of Jewish modernity. As we will see, Sara Levy stands out among other Berlin salonières for her resolute commitment to Jewish life. By investigating previously unconsidered sources such as private letters and libraries, and examining the 18th century elite female habits of reading and sociability, as well as of music making, scholars have begun to reassess the role that women played in creating modern European culture. As the daughter of a privileged Jewish family, Levy was active both as a consumer and producer of the cultural and artistic activities of her social class. Music was a central component in late 18th century Berlin society, and played a signal role for those privileged Jews involved with the imperial court and with the project of modernization. Domestic music making was part and parcel of the cultural world of elite homes in late 18th century Berlin. Jewish families, eager to partake of this culture as a means of integrating into German society, became ardent patrons and auditors of this art form. Music played a pivotal role in the salons created by German Jewish women like Sara Levy. It was performed, listened to, and discussed by the salonier and their guests, carefully chosen, cultured individuals who could appreciate what was being played. Sara Levy came to her musical interest through her natal family's value system. Daniel Itzig hired Johann Philipp Kernberger, a student of and advocate for the famed composer Johann Sebastian Bach, for Hannah and Bella, his two eldest daughters. Sara's younger sister Fanny, later a famous Viennese salonier in her own right, was an instrumentalist who helped establish the Gesellschaft der Musikfreunde and later created the music hall that became home to the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra. She and her husband Nathan Arnstein gave Mozart domicile in their home in 1781. Like her sisters, Sara Levy studied music. She, with Wilhelm Friedemann Bach, the son of J.S. Bach, and became an accomplished keyboardist. She commissioned progressive and noteworthy compositions by both Friedemann and his brother, Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach. And she owned a massive collection of music manuscripts and printed editions of music from her own day and from the previous generation. Levy played the harpsichord and fortepiano and owned both types of instruments made by the famous Zilberman family of Strasbourg. Being a lady at music did not necessarily mean playing solely for oneself. The 18th century salon, though domestic, was not private, and therefore suggests that music making allowed elite women to push the boundaries between the private domestic female sphere and the public male one. An orchestra of the 18th century size could easily have fit into Levy's salon, and she is thought to have played concertos as well as solo and chamber music in her home. When she played, she performed for an audience, and she went even further in stretching the boundaries of expected female behavior. She performed for friends and acquaintances in the public venue of the Singakademie zu Berlin, a bourgeois choral society founded in 1791 by Karl Fasch, a harpsichordist to the Prussian court. Her relationship with the Singakademie illustrates the central role that Jews played in the creation of German musical history. Karl Friedrich Zelter was appointed to the directorship of the Singakademie in 1800 and became particularly committed to Bach's work, performing excerpts from his passions, masses, and cantatas when it was not common practice to revisit the music of the past century. Becoming Felix Mendelssohn's music teacher in 1811, when his parents, Abraham and Leah Mendelssohn, relocated to Berlin, Zelter passed his ardor for Bach to his remarkable student, ensuring continued interest in Bach's music. So too did Sara Levy, who became particularly active in the Singakademie after her husband Samuel Levy's death in 1806. And she donated her collection of music, which included instrumental pieces, solo works, chamber music, symphonies, and keyboard concertos, many by the Bach family, to Zelter. In tonight's concert, you will hear examples of this glorious music from the archive, with commentary by Professor Christoph Wolff, who was instrumental in bringing these gems to light and to our ears. In 1823, Abraham and Leah Mendelssohn formally converted to Protestantism, adding the name Bartholdy to their name to distinguish themselves from their Jewish family. Sara Levy and her sister Fanny remained faithful to their origins. Sara and her husband had no children, and she left her considerable fortune to a Jewish orphanage, as well to other institutions of the Berlin Jewish community. Historian Natalie Neymar Goldberg contends that Levy was quite unusual in her circle regarding her Jewish affiliations. Levy was able to combine her participation in and dedication to German and European culture with her uninterrupted commitment to Jewish affairs in a way that other women, including some of her relatives and most of her friends, were unable to achieve. For Levy, therefore, her deep engagement with music, even within a tradition dominated by Christian ideals and practices, did not compromise her Jewishness. Age or widowhood may have compromised her public performing, which she ceased doing after 1815. By then, musical tastes had changed, and her role in preserving Bach's legacy was largely forgotten until the public revival initiated by her great-nephew, Felix Mendelssohn, through performances at the Singakademie in subsequent decades. Tonight's event, therefore, is both celebration and historical restoration. Sara Levy's life belongs to the social, ideological, political, and musical history of the German, European, and Jewish Enlightenments. Her world stands in dialogue with the male, textual Hebraist Haskalah, and its general distance from music as a means for regenerating Ashkenazic Jewish culture and the Jews themselves. Clarifying these different paths to modernization helps us to understand the untangled relationships among the Enlightenment, the Haskalah, acculturation, and secularization in the modernization of German Jewry, and of both men and of women. Examining her life allows us to probe how elite German Jews used the arts to construct and respond to late 18th century ideas, including philosophy and aesthetics. Because Jews were central to the formation of the German middle class in the 19th century, and music making was key to their aspirations, it behooves us to take more seriously the role of salonière like Sara Levy and of the music she performed and patronized in social class formation. Historians of Jewish modernity need to listen to how music making, as much as the acquisition of European manners and literary education, was a component of Bildung, the ideal of moral self-improvement to which 18th century Prussians aspired. Playing and listening to music could lead to refinement and to the development of character. Sara Levy's life also appertains to the field of music history. Her passion for Bach, his contemporaries, and their legacy engages questions of musical historicism and its relationship to the processes of canonization of German and European art music in the 18th and 19th centuries. Her involvement with the Singakademie and its archive also raises questions about the role Jews played in creating, protecting, and preserving the German musical heritage. And obviously, her life is fertile ground for women's historians who seek to understand how gender-informed Enlightenment ideals, the creation of a civic sphere, educational prescriptions, and every other aspects of German culture at the turn of the 19th century. On her own terms, Sara Levy was a fascinating and unusual person whose legacy as a gifted musician allows us to experience viscerally her world and musical passion with all of our senses. She was a bold, cultural, intellectual boundary crosser of the early modern period who negotiated a variety of environments while maintaining her own religious identity. She did so while actively participating and contributing to a broader cultural context in which secularization, modernization, and interfaith sociability, issues that are still so relevant today, were central, if contested, subjects of discussion. The philosopher Immanuel Kant's iconic Enlightenment salvo, sapere aude, dare to know, challenged his fellow Europeans to possess fully their own rationality and apply it to knowing and shaping the world. In her own time, Sara Levy did not hesitate to know herself and the world around her. It is we, later generations, who have been lax in the task of knowing her. When Professor Cypess and I organized the original symposium, we did so in order to give Sara Levy her historical due, honoring her selfhood as a woman, a musician, a Jew, and as an enlightened person. What better way to appreciate her life than to be enveloped in the sounds of her world? Please join us now in Sara Levy's salon. Thank you very much. I have one additional thank you. I want to thank Willard Martin, who is a harpsichord maker and who has taken care and will be taking care of the period instruments throughout the concert. So thank you very much.
The quartet you just heard by Johann Joachim Quantz, the flute teacher of Frederick the Great, serves as the perfect opening piece for our salon concert. Why is that? One of 4 quartets preserved in a unique score in the collection of Sara Levy. And then this collection, along with the entire musical archive of the Berlin Singakademie, was lost and inaccessible since the end of World War II and became only available in the 21st century. So we could not have heard the piece in the previous centuries. Now, let me briefly explain the rediscovery of the Singakademie archive, which was one of the earliest and most extensive musical archives that was established in the late 18th and early 19th centuries by the 2 founders of the Singakademie in Berlin, Karl Fasch, who started the Singakademie in 1791, and Karl Zelter, who took over in 1800. The Singakademie, modeled after the Academy for Ancient Music in London, was devoted as a choral society initially to retrospective programs, music of the past, primarily the 16th, 17th, and early 18th centuries. They stopped with the music of Bach and Handel. But it was important because contemporary music in the late 18th century was really the music of the day and was what filled the musical life of the day. There was no interest in historical music, and it begins to start with the work of the Singakademie and then was continued by such seminal figures as Felix Mendelssohn Bartholdy. Now, this archive was inaccessible for a very long time, and the reason for that is it was put away for safekeeping in the 1940s in order to make sure that it would not become a victim of the war, as many other museum and library holdings were evacuated from the major cities of the principal theater of war, and it was put into a Silesian castle. Now, Silesia was overrun by the Red Army, and the Red Army cleaned out all these depositories, and there was a great secrecy about all of this, so we had no idea where it was, whether it had survived at all, and only through the good services of the Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute, we put together a small expedition in 1999, and were lucky enough to be able to locate the Singakademie archive in Kiev, Ukraine. And then only a few years later, and I'm not going to go into the details because they are complicated, some of it is quite funny, but they were repatriated in 2001 and are now, the entire materials are now accessible in the Berlin Staatsbibliothek. It is important to realize that this retrospective archive contained quite a lot of music from the Bach family, especially Johann Sebastian and his sons. And the reason for that is quite clear because of the family connections that were made by the Itzigs and the Mendelssohns. Now, it is important to realize that Abraham and Leah Mendelssohn, the parents of Felix Mendelssohn Bartholdy, met as members of the Singakademie in 1796. Then Mendelssohn was asked by his father to establish a branch of the bank, the Mendelssohn Bank, in Hamburg. So he moved to Hamburg. And in 1805, the estate of Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach became available because his daughter, Anna Carolina, had died. The entire estate was auctioned off, and one of the principal buyers was Abraham Mendelssohn. And that was 5 years before Felix Mendelssohn's birth. Now, for the Mendelssohn, Levy, Solomon families, the name Bach at the time was a household word. Not very many people in Europe knew much about these older composers. But the parents of Felix Mendelssohn had grown up with the music of the Bach family. And now, after purchasing a major portion of the Bach estate in 1805, Mendelssohns moved back to Berlin in 1811, and they donated what they had acquired to the archive of the Singakademie. Now, throughout the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century, the collection was not really researched, and we didn't have much knowledge about the way it was put together. We did not know that it was primarily Jewish families who had contributed such important materials to the holdings, and it is hard to imagine that without this collecting activity, especially of Abraham Mendelssohn, Felix's father, much of the music by Johann Sebastian Bach that we love would not have survived. And I think that's a very important part of the story. In the early 19th century, in around 1805, the Choral Society, the Singakademie, established a Repienschule, which is, as we would call it, an orchestral academy. Ripieno players are, the second, third, fourth stand players. And they played together with members of the Royal Court Orchestra, and therefore were trained, the amateurs, in orchestral playing. And they added to their choral programs orchestral programs. And one of the featured soloists in the early concerts was Sara Levy, a professional level harpsichordist and fortepianist. And it was she who performed in 1806 for the first time the Bach D minor harpsichord concerto, that is Johann Sebastian Bach's D minor harpsichord concerto, which about 20 years later, Felix, her grandnephew, played in Leipzig with the Gewandhaus and advertised it as the first modern performance. He did not know that his great-aunt had performed it 20 years earlier. Felix was not quite aware of all the details of the family history, but I think it is important to understand that there is this kind of continuous history and continuous occupation with the music of the Bach family. Now, I have to be brief. The collection of Sara Levy bears, for the most part, stamps that read SSL, which means Samuel and Sara Levy. Her husband, Samuel Levy, was a flutist. And so the two were active musicians. She, the professional level keyboardist, and he, a rather accomplished flutist. And we have to imagine that he would have played a piece such as the one we heard a few minutes ago. Now, we turn to the next segment of our program, and we hear two very different pieces by two very different composers. Wilhelm Friedemann, the oldest son of Johann Sebastian, was Sara Levy's teacher for quite a number of years. He spent the last 10 years of his life in Berlin as a freelance musician. And the Levy couple supported Wilhelm Friedemann financially for the last years of his life. And he, in return, gave them material that they could perform. The improvisatory fantasia we now hear is a typical virtuoso piece that demonstrates the technical skills of the composer, Wilhelm Friedemann, and also, of course, her student, Sara Levy. It is consisting of lots of different sections that are contrasting sections, passage work, virtuosic passage work, and then reflective passages of a polyphonic nature and of a more expressive quality. So this kind of free-flowing piece is a very important genre in the mid and late 18th century, and we see that Mozart and Beethoven later pick up from this. And Carl Philipp Emanuel, Wilhelm Friedemann's older brother, devoted many activities to this kind of improvisatory style. The piece that follows is a sonata by Johann Sebastian Bach in 3 movements with a very expressive, beautiful minor mode middle movement. It can be performed in 2 different ways. We hear it tonight for flute, violin, and basso continuo. You could also perform it with flute, and the right hand of the harpsichord plays the violin part, and the left hand plays the continuo part. And we can imagine that Sara and Samuel Levy, as a twosome duo, would perform this piece in either way, but perhaps their preferred solution would have been the duo performance. But as a trio, it works perfectly fine as well, and we hear it now. Music in Sara Levy's salon did not consist exclusively of keyboard and chamber music. It also included, as we shall see and hear, vocal music, songs, but also what you do not hear tonight, orchestral music, because the mansion in which the Levys lived was very large. It occupied a major part of the museum island in Berlin, and it was just about 2/10 of a mile away from the royal castle. So they were really at the center of everything. And so they could assemble the Berlin intellectual and social elite at their salon gatherings. The songs that you will hear in a few moments are, for the most part, strophic songs. And that is, the music of each strophe is the same. But that is deliberate, because the idea was that the poetry should dictate the flow of the music. The meter and the rhyme order should be reflected in the melodic design of the song. But also, all songs from that period had a theme, and every stanza served the same theme, and therefore the music should display the character so that it would fit the text of every strophe that would be serving the theme of the poem. Now, there are 3 composers we listen to tonight when you hear these lieder, poetic songs set by Zelter, Kirnberger, and Friedemann Bach. Kirnberger was a pedagogue, and Zelter was also a pedagogue. Pedagogues are not necessarily the very best composers. As we can see with Zelter, who was a reasonable composer, but his student Felix Mendelssohn was a lot better. Now, there are other instances. Johann Sebastian is generally considered the better composer in comparison to his students. But still, I think these pedagogue composers have a lot to say, because they also had a major influence on the scene. And that is particularly true of the 2 composers, Philipp Kirnberger and Carl Friedrich Zelter. Johann Philipp Kirnberger was a student of Johann Sebastian Bach's, and he studied with him in Leipzig for a number of years. And he was the one who actually formulated the art of Bach's composition in such a way that it could be put in a book. And he published in the 1770s a multi-volume book which he called Die Kunst des reinen Satzes, the art of pure composition. And he was, as Nancy mentioned, the teacher of the older siblings of Sara Levy, but he also was the teacher of Moses Mendelssohn. So there is the direct connection between the philosopher Mendelssohn and Kirnberger's preoccupation with the art of pure composition. We do not know in what way the 2 of them conversed, but it was quite clear. And we do have a small treatise by Mendelssohn in which he discusses aspects of musical temperament. So he probably learned a lot from Kirnberger, but probably Kernberger learned just as much from Moses Mendelssohn. Zelter was a close friend of Johann Wolfgang Goethe, and the two Goethe poems that he set to music are particularly beautiful, not only as compositions, but particularly as poems by Goethe, especially Das Land, wo die Zitronen blühen. So the lemon reference is, of course, clearly one to the culture of Italy. The second piece, the instrumental piece, no, I should mention the song by Wilhelm Friedemann. That is a very different kind of song because he is not following the pattern of the strophic song. It is through composed. It has several strophes, but every strophe is set in a different way. And we can see that in this particular song, the imagination of the composer shapes the piece and contributes significantly to the presentation of the poetry. Now, it is an interesting piece which survives only in a single copy in the hand of Wilhelm Friedemann Bach in the Sara Levy collection, and it has never been published. It is about to be published, and the performance we hear tonight is from the proof sheets of the first edition of this piece. It was, in all likelihood, a song commissioned for the wedding of Sara and Samuel Levy. It has the title Cantilena Nuptiarum, that is, it is a wedding piece, and it was composed by the 73-year-old Wilhelm Friedemann in honor of his student on the occasion of her marriage. The following piece is an organ piece, actually, and Bach's organ music was not published at the time, and the only manuscript that we have in Berlin of the trio sonatas for organ was the copy, the autograph copy, in Wilhelm Friedemann's possession. So he actually made the arrangement for two pianos so that he perhaps could perform it with his student. Now, Johann Sebastian designed these organ sonatas for his oldest son in the 1720s. And they were designed as one-man shows. So the right hand and the left hand piano play the treble parts, and the feet play the bass. Now, the compromise for the arrangement for two keyboard instruments is, of course, that two musicians play it. But it has also the quality of an organ piece, because if you perform it on two different keyboard instruments, the plucked harpsichord and the one with the hammer action of the fortepiano, you get two different colors. And if you combine the left hand for both instruments, you also have, again, a new color for the bass. And this kind of registration brings these fantastic pieces in a very different way to light. Apparently, it was a favorite in the Sara Levy and Itzig household, because her sister Fanny also made a copy of this arrangement and took it to Vienna, where Mozart then copied it, and he turned these J.S. Bach organ trios into string trios and added a prelude to them. So we can trace these pieces from Wilhelm Friedemann through the Itzig Levy household to W.A. Mozart. So this kind of perspective on 18th century music is quite fascinating, and we owe this to the activities of Sara Levy.
Zitronen blühen, im Dunkeln Laub die Goldrosen glühen. Ein sanfter Wind vom blauen Himmel weht, die Myrte still und auf der Lorbeer steht. Kennst du es wohl? Kennst du es wohl? Dahin, dahin möcht ich mit dir mein Geliebter ziehen. Dahin möcht ich mit dir mein Geliebter ziehen. Kennst du das Haus, auf Säulen ruht sein Dach, es glänzt der Saal, es schimmert das Gemach, und Marmorbilder stehen und sehen mich an. Was hat man hier, du armes, armes Kind, getan? Kennst du es wohl? Kennst du es wohl? Dahin, dahin möcht ich mit dir mein Beschützer ziehen. Dahin möcht ich mit dir mein Beschützer ziehen. Kennst du den Berg und seinen Wolkenstieg? Das Maultier sucht im Nebel seinen Weg. Im Höhlen wohnt der Drachen alte Brut. Es stürzt der Fels und über ihn die Flut. Kennst du ihn wohl? Kennst du ihn wohl? Dahin, dahin geht unser Weg, o Vater, lass uns ziehen. Dahin geht unser Weg, o mein Geliebter, o mein Beschützer, o Vater, Vater, dahin, o Vater, lass uns ziehen. Heiß mich nicht reden, heiß mich schweigen, denn mein Geheimnis ist mir Pflicht. Ich möchte dir mein ganzes Innere zeigen. Allein das Schicksal will es nicht. Zur rechten Zeit vertreibt die Sonne auf die finstere Nacht. und sie muss sich erhellen. Der harte Fels schließt seinen Busen auf, missgönnt der Erde nicht die tiefe Wagnen Quellen. Ein jeder sucht die Mann des Freundes Ruf. Gott kann die Brust in Klagen sich ergießen. Allein ein Schwur tritt mir die Lippen zu, und nur mein Gott vermag sie aufzuschließen. Herz, mein Herz, sei ruhig, bleibe still, still und harre. Über dir lebt eine Vorsicht, Gott lebt, Gott ist sein Weg. Herz, mein Herz, sei ruhig, Schmerz und Gram fliegt wie Wolken, neue Kraft stärkt den Kämpfer, labt ihn mühnen, süße Ruhe kennt den Sieger nach dem Streit, nach dem Streite. Hoffe Kronen, Lebenskronen warten dein. Hier ist Sehnsucht, dort ist Schauen, dort ist erst der Himmel. Doch hier dräng dich hindurch, durch Labyrinth durch. Gott lebt, sei ruhig, sei Wie wunderlich, mein guter Mann, sprichst du nicht von Vergehen. Aufs äußere Dunkeln gewähl ich an, aufs Herz nur musst du sehen. Mein Zeug vertreibt, mein wer ihr seid. Ich denk, als Frau haben. Kein Mann bewacht sein Weib wie du, so will es schon nicht taugen. Allein, was sagst du nun mit mir? Ich denk, ich winke dir. Dass doch mein Lachen dich verdrießt, kann ich denn anders machen? Du kennst die ja, wie los ist, wahrhaftig, man muss lachen. Sei aber nur nicht wunderlich, ich lach auf dich. Erlaubt es die Gelegenheit, dass ich zum Zeitvertreibe aus nachbarlicher Höflichkeit beim Baum stehen bleibe. So lass mich stehen, glaub es mir, ich steh bei dir. Er greift und drückt mir die Hand mit höchst bescheidener Blicke. So nennest du es Unverstand, dass ich ihn wieder drücke. Doch nein, was hat ihn das auf sich? Ich drücke dich. Dich bring ich den Sinnen ein, mit zärtlichsten Gewissen. Drum lass den Nachbar bei mir sein, lass mich ihn auch wohl küssen. Er ist bisschen ernst, versteht sich, ich denk, ich küsse dich.
One of the regular guests at Sara Levy's salons was the Prussian Kapellmeister Johann Friedrich Reichhardt. And in his memoirs, he refers to the Bach cult in the Itzig family. And this refers not only to Johann Sebastian Bach's music, but also to the music composed by the younger generation, and not only by Wilhelm Friedemann, but also by his younger brothers. Because when Friedemann died in 1784, Sara got in touch with Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, who had been for a long time in Berlin as a musician of the Prussian court, but in 1768 became Georg Philipp Telemann's successor in Hamburg. So he was away. But she contacted him in Hamburg and asked him to compose pieces for her salon. And she also turned to Johann Christoph Friedrich Bach in Bückeburg and asked him also to compose pieces for her. We hear as the concluding piece a quartet by Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, a piece from a set of 3 such quartets commissioned from Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach and surviving in autograph scores in the Sara Levy collection. They are actually works that Carl Philipp Emanuel composed in the last year of his life. He also composed a concerto for orchestra and solo harpsichord and solo fortepiano for the Itzig Levy family, and also in his last year. It is one of the very few pieces in which the old-fashioned harpsichord and the modern fortepiano are placed in juxtaposition. And it must have been particular fun for Sara and her sister, or whoever else played the other solo part, to present this kind of modern music that also invokes the past. This is, in a way, true also of Carl Philipp Emanuel's late quartets, one of which we will hear in a few moments. They are called quartets, but performed by only 3 musicians. How come? In Vienna, they would refer to this kind of music as piano trio, because it is 3 people who perform. Generally a violinist, a cellist, and a keyboardist. In this case, the design of the quartet played by a trio is very special. We have a flute, that is a treble instrument. We have a viola, a tenor instrument, and then we have the right hand of the piano connecting the 2 treble areas, and the left hand of the piano. So C.P.E. Bach specifically designs the piece as a 4-part score, and therefore, considering its contrapuntal design, refers to it as a quartet. It is also not a piece of old-fashioned polyphony. What Philipp Emanuel Bach demonstrates in these pieces is that the ancient art of counterpoint can also serve to inject very new and exciting ideas into contemporary music. So what you hear is a brand new piece composed in 1788 with brand new designs, but in which he makes use of older techniques, and of course his usual virtuosic inserts. But it demonstrates that music is alive, in particular by making constant references to ancient technique, and I am sure you will notice that this kind of Bach cult in the Yi-heng Levy household was not something that looked only back, but it looked at the present and possibly also at the future. Thank you. One more thing. I'm told that I should report to you that there is going to be a reception at the end of this concert, and you are all invited.
Thank you.